Silk Spectre. That's an interesting name.
Hi, Jay. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Sorry, I have my baby here and she's kind of starting to fuss, so I'll just make this really quick. I just have a quick question
Uh huh.
and pretty specific. But I was listening to you the other day. You did like a debate a while back. I think it was like 3 years ago with Eric Ybarra on reason and theology. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I just have a quick question. I actually have so many questions about our debate, but I'll try and keep it quick.
That's
Um,
fine.
so,
Take your
uh,
time. Take your time. Relax. Breathe through your nose, out your mouth.
Sorry, I'm a nervous public speaker. I'm not very good. But yeah, so you seem to take like particular umbrage with Vatican I, kind of solidifying the primacy of the papacy. And I'm paraphrasing, so if you want to correct me, go ahead. And that was kind of where you started to go, or where you felt you were starting to go awry with Roman Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
So you could just kind of reiterate your stance on Vatican I and how that kind of throws a spanner in the wheel, and maybe then I'll ask my question.
Right. So my critique, if you're interested in a fuller, worked out version of that, we did 2 live streams where I pointed out that in my view, the strongest arguments against Roman Catholicism are actually Vatican I. So one of those is this stream right here, and it's called "How Vatican I is the Key to Refuting Roman Catholicism." And then the second follow-up to that is how the papacy and Vatican I are contradictions. And so I would say that there's 3 ways you could approach this question. The first is that in terms of the biblical and historical witness of the church fathers, we don't see the Vatican I view of the papacy. We do see a primacy and an honor that Rome has in terms of the canons and in terms of the councils. But in my view, in my argument, that does not translate into the doctrine of infallibility and indefectibility that is taught at Vatican I. So that's one argument and one approach, and there's a lot of specifics to that, but that's the one point. Second point is that the 7 ecumenical councils, each one of those councils has a lot of canons that the church then uses as church law, right, to apply to various cases in terms of how the church interprets the controversies of that time. Every one of the councils has various canons that are enacted that are contrary to the Vatican I definition of the role of the papacy in the church. We can see this, for example, in not just the Chieti document of some years ago, where the Vatican, under the approval of the Pope, admitted that the modus operandi of the papacy in the first 1,000 years was not what Vatican I says. The most recent synod in Alexandria, which also produced another document, much like the Chieti document, is also now admitting even further evidence that the papacy of the first 1,000 years didn't operate the way that Vatican I argues that the papacy is and has always been. So remember, it's a key point that Leo the XIII's encyclicals. I have one more point, then I'll let you talk. Leo the XIII's encyclical on the papacy makes it very clear that it has always been the case and was always understood to be the case that the Vatican I view is correct, and it has always been seen that way. So Leo's encyclicals, in my reading, don't leave room for the idea of this as a doctrinal development like Newman and other people would say. So if you want to be faithful to Leo's interpretation, then the papacy is not a thing that develops. The Vatican I view has to always have been the case. But there are just so many historical examples that contradict that it even led the most famous historian at that time, Döllinger, to write an entire book on this. He was at Vatican I. I have Döllinger's book over there, all of his qualms that he has, and they basically said, well, submit to this or we'll excommunicate you. Now, fast forward to Vatican II. This is my third point. So those were my first 2, biblical, historical views, the excommunication of Honorius, things like this, which I think disprove the indefectibility claim of the papacy. My third point is that when I look at what I see in the pre-Vatican II papal encyclicals, and you could get the Tan book, Popes Against the Modern Errors, as one example, that book is full of things that are night and day contradictions in the Vatican II documents and in the Vatican II papal ordinary magisterial teachings after Vatican II, all the way up to Francis today. So the manifestations of that belief, in terms of the contradictions I'm saying, are precisely why we see things like Francis okaying the Abu Dhabi faith center together with Muslims and Jews, right? That manifestation, those actions, like the prayer meetings at Assisi, manifest the interpretation that they have of Vatican II, which is not a, quote, conservative reading of Vatican II. It is a radical reading, and it is precisely contradictory to the very things that we would read about in Pacendi Dominici of Pius X, Lamentabili, the Syllabus of Errors, Mirari Vos, on and on and on and on. I can list you all those encyclicals prior to Vatican II. And the clearest of which, for example, this is my last point, then I'll let you talk. Clearest of which is Mortalium Animos, which basically says that interfaith religious gatherings are impossible for Catholics because they amount to an apostasy, a giving up of the faith. So how is it that the Holy Spirit can lead Pius XI to say in 1928 that it is an apostasy, but a few decades later, the Holy Spirit now reverses that and says, no, actually, interfaith gatherings are the work of the Holy Spirit. So something's apostasy within 30 years becomes the work of the Holy Spirit. These are outright contradictions, and there's countless others. For example, that Hindus and Muslims all worship the same God as Christians, as Nostra Aetate says. That's simply not true. So I can keep going. The change in the teaching on the death penalty. The death penalty is, according to Francis, contrary to the gospel. No, sorry, that's not. You can't say as a trad that it's natural justice for centuries. Catechism of Trent, it's justice. No. It's contrary to the gospel now, according to Francis.
Yeah.
This is just on and on and on changes.
Yeah. No, I get you got tons of examples. I actually really do have to run because my baby is kind of freaking out. But I guess my question was this. So, like, there seemed to be in that particular debate, and sorry to the listeners because this is kind of debate specific, but like a serious difference on what you were calling like the Orthodox paradigm allows for a certain amount of error because of this non-existence of an indefectibility clause. And I know that that's like kind of broad brushstrokes, but like if I could maybe sum up, that would be it. Right.
So we don't think that there's any one apostolic see or C that can't defect. Any of them can defect.
Right. Okay, gotcha. So, and then kind of how you described it was like you're carrying a bit of like maybe a certain amount of error and anyone see at any given time, but because you don't have this indefectibility clause, those errors will be shaken off over time, right? Throughout.
Yeah. So, like, if you look at the letters to the seven churches, right? Jesus warns that you can have your lampstand removed. And for the Orthodox, that's true of any of the churches, including Rome. That's why Paul in Romans 11 says that beware lest you be cut off. Why would he warn the Roman church that they could be cut off?
My question is this then, and I don't know if this is going to make sense to you, but before Vatican I then, could the Holy See of Rome been considered Orthodox? And that this whole Pope thing was just one of those particular errors?
Right. So for the Orthodox Church, we would say that it's by the year 1274 that Rome is officially no longer Orthodox. There was already the excommunication, but the excommunication in 1054 was not really over theology per se. But the definitive theological pronouncements are at the Council of Lyons, where you have the eternal double hypostatic procession doctrine being dogmatized. And then you have the response councils of the Orthodox and Byzantium to say, no, we reject the teaching of the Council of Lyons, and that's what leads to the Council of Florence, which is a failed reunion council.
I guess, and I would love to chat longer, but like I said, my baby is kind of freaking out, so I do have to run.
Okay.
But I guess what my point is that I think, as a Roman Catholic, I think that the indefectibility of the papacy is kind of necessary because, like, it means then that we have certainty that, let's call it, the fruits of Roman Catholicism, they're all... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but it doesn't give the certainty. That's kind of what I've been trying to say.
It doesn't give the certainty when the Pope speaks ex cathedra that paradigm that is coming from the
you
Holy
don't
Spirit.
even have a list of, all you have is 3 general criteria of when he's, quote, speaking ex cathedra, and there's no list of what the ex cathedra statements are. So in the case of individual Catholics, it actually doesn't give you any better epistemic standpoint than anyone else. It doesn't provide that.
Right. Okay. Listen, sorry, I would love to get more into the
That's
weeds
fine.
with you with this, but I do have to run.
Yeah, you come back anytime.
Talk to you later.
We do this anytime. You're welcome to come back and you can have the floor and make whatever arguments you'd like.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yep.